The shoulder joint is a very mobile joint. We've got a very large ball and a very, very shallow socket. So it sacrifices its stability for mobility. We can move it in every and any which direction, which is great. However, it does pose a problem when we do play sport. The ligaments themselves provide great support for the shoulder, and in combination with muscles, fantastic, and prevent the shoulder from dislocating, or what we call subluxing. And subluxation is the word that we use when we have like almost a partial dislocation occurring there. So the ligaments of the shoulder, which give it its passive support, run across the anterior part, the front part, and it forms like a Z type of support on that front part of the shoulder. What we do know is that whilst our shoulder's in that 90 degrees and below, we've got really strong, good support of the ligament. As soon as our arm reaches above that 90 degrees, when we're taking that overhead mark or we're leaping forward for the ball, that places our shoulder in a position of duress because the ligaments at the front part are not supporting it that well. It has support only of the inferior part, which is quite a weak ligament. And that's where we're at potential problems of it undergoing a subluxation or, in worst case, a dislocation. So we're going to show some techniques on what you can do to try and help that. I'll show a simple taping technique on Ev that will help giving a bit of support. And the other thing I think is important is what muscle groups do we need to strengthen and at what position to try and strengthen that shoulder a bit more down the track. So whilst the shoulder's in this great position, the ligaments are quite tight and they support and give really good, strong support to his actual shoulder. Once we raise it up above that 90 degrees, this is when those ligaments then become a lot more vulnerable to external forces. And it's in particular the force of the hand going backward or coming from behind that we're going to be very susceptible to trauma. If he does undergo trauma, there's a simple little assessment tool that we look at in order for us to ascertain how much laxity is in that shoulder joint itself. So we're looking at now a stability test to ascertain whether there is excessive movement in the shoulder, whether ligaments have been either traumatized or are susceptible to that subluxation or that slight moving in and out through the actual joint itself. And often what we need to do with these type of shoulders is just have a look in the three ranges of shoulder movement to have a look at which ligament in particular is a lot looser. And as you can see, when I've got his arm by his side, there's not a lot of movement. There's a bit of movement, but there's not a lot. It's quite snug. As soon as we get to that 90-degree mark, which I was saying to before, that is that position of where the ligament's quite vulnerable, we start to get a lot more play in the actual shoulder joint. And this is where we're a lot more vulnerable to further trauma. In Ev's case, it is quite snug, even though there is a bit of laxity in play, which is quite normal, and there's no sort of real concern there. But we can show a taping technique that will just help to limit that movement and also some exercises. Ready, Dave? Yep. Okay, the unstable shoulder. We're just going to go over the simple taping technique I talked about to help protect those anterior ligaments. So it's a bit restrictive on the shoulder, but it still allows the football player to be able to mark, tackle and do all those type of things. It'll just prevent him from being stretched in that really upper motion and making those ligaments susceptible to trauma. So once we've placed the anchor and an undercoat on over the top of the trapezius, the shoulder, and one around the arm, the taping itself is quite simple, and it's more like a figure, half figure eight type of action. So we start at the actual front of the actual shoulder and lower part of the chest, and it runs around the shoulder like so and comes across and under the back. So that's the first bit of tape on that side. I like overlapping that roughly by a half, and I do a couple of strips of tape on either side of it. So you'll have roughly a half over the top, under it goes. Make sure you don't get the follicles under the armpit, and like so, perfect. Now you can also go a bit lower and do the third strip. I find often two's enough. Same process at the back part of the shoulder. We start at the back, we'll come across the front of the shoulder like so, and goes underneath and over the actual back. And repeating again, overlapping the tape by roughly a half. And often after you've done the hard tape, you can put the soft cover on to give it that comforting support and also just a bit of extra protection when you do get tackled and things like that. But effectively, that's the main two bits that's going to give him protection. Don't forget, importantly, need to anchor this down. If we don't anchor it down, unfortunately, we do not have a sound support around that actual shoulder joint itself. So effectively, when it's all done, when Evan then gets into that position, can you feel it winding up there? Yeah, it winds up and prevents him from getting in that vulnerable, precarious position, which can result in shoulder trauma. The next thing for the shoulder, which is important, is to strengthen a couple of the muscles around what we call the rotator cuff, which is a group of muscles around the shoulder. And they are responsible for stabilizing the shoulder. In particular, when we're talking about an unstable shoulder, it's important to exercise the muscles at and above shoulder level. I'm going to give you two simple exercises which you can implement to help strengthen and use this as part of preventing injury to the actual shoulder itself. And it's a great thing to even incorporate in your current gym programs. So the first one's going to be an external rotation at 90 degrees. So Ev, just bring the arm at 90, elbows at 90, wrist is nice and straight, and we're going to bring it upwards like so. Yep, good. And then on your own, perfect. So it's a great way of stabilising those scapular external rotators to try and give Ev that strength that he needs. And the second exercise number 2, is going to be a direct flexion motion up, which is also part of that scapular stabilising region to help around that lower trapezius and mid-trap region as well. So these are the two movement patterns which, when we think about in football itself, when we've got our arms in a marking position or outstretched for a ball, as the vulnerable positions that we want to try and protect in the future.